Hello guys. Tonight's story isn't about emperors or warriors. It's about the ones who stood just behind them. The ones who never held power, but spoke to something that did. This is the kind of history that doesn't wear a crown. It wears smoke, and silence, and feathers. So before you drift off, give this video a like if it earns it, and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. Now, turn off the lights, maybe light a candle, because tonight, we're heading far from the battlefield, into the hills, into the wind. At the center of it all, a figure with no sword, just a drum, a pouch of bones, and a dream that changed the fate of an empire. Congratulations. You've just stepped into a story whispered to the sky and never written down. You are not a warrior, not a horseman, not a leader of men. You live just outside the camp, not because you were cast out, but because you chose silence. Your yurt is smaller than the rest, lower to the ground. The felt walls are darkened by smoke and time. No embroidered silks here, no family crests or banners, just bone, leather, ash, and breath. In the center of your yurt is a fire, rarely allowed to go out. It burns slow and soft, feeding on dry twigs and a few precious scraps of dung. Above it, a cooking pot hangs, mostly empty these days. It still smells faintly of herbs and dried meat. You rise before the sun. You do not speak. You do not eat. Instead, you sit cross-legged and inhale the curling smoke of burned juniper. The scent is sharp, pine and earth. It fills the lungs and bites the sinuses. Outside, the wind moans low across the steppe. The spirits are said to travel on the wind. Some listening, some whispering. You listen back. For a word, a murmur, a sign. Your body is lean from fasting. Your hair braided with bits of bone and cloth. Around your neck hangs a string of charms, bird claws, beads, tiny mirrored discs that flash in firelight. Your wrists are wrapped in fur and cord. You wear a tunic of animal hide, not sewn, but knotted. Each knot means something. You do not remember when you tied the first one. The drum sits beside your bedding. You made it yourself. Horsehide stretched tight over a circular frame, carved with symbols. You do not play it for music. When you drum, you leave. Your body stays seated, rocking gently. But your spirit walks into the sky, into the earth, into the dreams of others. People don't see you often. That is how it should be. They come only when they must. When a child won't stop coughing. When a horse falls and will not rise, when a hunter returns with hollow eyes. They bring offerings, a bowl of milk, a small cloth of color, sometimes blood, if the spirits are angry. They do not look you in the eye. They call you the one between man and beast, between breath and shadow. You speak softly, or not at all. You watch the smoke. You cast bones carved from sheep vertebrae. You listen to what they say. Your yurt smells of many things. Dried herbs, cracked leather, ash, and old sweat. There is always a sense that someone else is inside with you. But when you look, it's empty. That's normal. You were not chosen through bloodline. You were chosen through vision. As a child, you walked into the snow one day and did not come back for 3 nights. When they found you, your skin was blue and your eyes were open. You said nothing for a week. Then one day you spoke a name no one had told you. A name of someone already dead. That was enough. You were taken from your family, trained by an old woman who spoke more to animals than people. She taught you to watch cloud shapes, to taste the wind, to fast until you saw things that were not there, but also were. She died one winter, but you still hear her voice, especially at night, Winter is the hardest. The food disappears, the firewood grows damp, and the spirits, they come closer. In dreams, they show you things you cannot forget. Faces you don't know, mountains you've never seen. Sometimes the dreams follow you into the day. You walk outside and forget where you are. You speak a language no one taught you. You wake up with dirt under your fingernails, though you don't remember digging. The tribe tolerates you, respects you, fears you. Children are told not to stare. Husbands make a sign with their fingers when they pass. Wives leave food at your door, but never knock. They say when you die, your spirit won't leave. It will sit beside the fire. It will wait for the next one. Because shamans do not retire, and they do not rest. Not fully, not ever. The wind picks up faintly in the distance. The fire inside your yurt flickers low. And now, let us leave the silence of daily life and drift toward a darker legend, a story whispered for centuries, a tale of a shaman who dreamed the death of a king. You tend to the fire without thinking. It's become something like breath to you, unspoken, automatic. Feed it when the wind rises. Stir the coals when the ash begins to build. You've never let it go out, not even once. They say the fire is a mouth through which the spirits speak, and if that mouth closes, you might not be able to open it again. Smoke hangs heavy in your yurt, curling like fingers through the rafters. Sometimes you see faces in it, not always human. Once, in spring, a deer's head formed above your drum, antlers wide, eyes closed, lips parted in a soundless warning. You watched it drift apart like steam. You didn't speak of it. Some things are not for telling. Most days pass like that. Long stretches of silence, broken only by the creak of your bones and the wind outside. Your body aches often, not with illness, but from being still too long. Your joints stiffen in the cold, your back tightens in the damp, but you do not complain. Pain is part of it. Your teacher once told you that pain was the soul's way of reshaping the body to fit the unseen. You eat once a day, sometimes less. A bit of dried meat, a broth made from bitter roots. You prefer to eat alone, in the dark, listening to the hiss of the fire. There is something sacred in the quiet chewing of a meal. It connects you to those who came before, and to those who will come after. The few visitors who come are careful. They knock with their feet, never their hands. They speak in half whispers, offering gifts before they speak their need. One brings a tuft of hair wrapped in string. A child's fever has lasted 7 nights. Another offers a small silver pin, stolen you suspect, and asks you to undo a dream that keeps returning. You accept what they bring, not because you need it, but because it's tradition. Gifts balance the scale. Every act has a cost. When they leave, you don't say goodbye. You touch the drum instead. One finger, once. You know many words for spirit, but you rarely say them. You don't need to. Each object in your yurt holds its own whisper. A cracked antler, taken from a deer struck by lightning. A bundle of feathers that fell from the sky after a full moon. A shard of obsidian, black as the night your mother died. Some nights you speak to them, not in your own voice, but in a low hum that comes from somewhere deep in your throat, like something trying to crawl its way out. You do not remember when you learned it, only that your teacher once looked at you sharply when she heard it and said, "Don't use that voice too often. The ones who gave it to you will want it back." You understood. Mostly. You do not sleep like other people. Your sleep is shallow, strange, and full of edges. Sometimes it comes quickly, pulling you down like water. Other times, it avoids you for nights, leaving you sitting by the fire, eyelids twitching, watching shadows crawl across the walls. But when it does come, the real work begins. You dream as others do, but your dreams are not random. They have structure, language, texture. They are places you revisit, people you have never met, smells you could swear are real, burnt leather, wet feathers, pine sap and blood. You learned long ago how to tell the difference between an ordinary dream and a spirit-sent one. The ordinary ones fade with morning. The spirit ones stay with you. They press behind the eyes. They feel like memories, even if they're not your own. When those dreams come, you know what to do. You rise slowly, without speaking. You reach for the old hide bundle beside your bedding, the one wrapped in crow feathers and fastened with deer sinew. Inside are your bones. They are not just bones. They are shaped, etched, polished with oil and smoke. 6 small vertebrae from a lamb that died in winter. Each one carved with symbols, not written language, but markings you've seen in visions. Some are spirals, some are like eyes. One looks like a spider's web. You throw them carefully with your left hand. Always the left. They clatter softly on the floor, scattering like seeds. And then you read them. It's not reading in the way most understand. You don't look for symbols or patterns. You feel, you listen, you let your gaze soften and let the bones speak. Sometimes they arrange into stories. A curved piece pointing north might mean a visitor will come from that direction. 2 bones touching could mean a reconciliation. A single vertebra upside down, illness. If all 6 land face up, you throw again. Spirits are undecided. You remember one throw many years ago that left all the bones in a tight cluster, perfectly still. No bounce, no roll. You stared at them for a long time. That night, you dreamed of a tent burning in slow motion, fire crawling like fingers up the hide. The next day, a neighboring camp sent word. A yurt had caught fire in the wind. A child had been inside. You don't take pride in such things. They're not victories, they're warnings. Reminders that you are a bridge, not a judge. After throwing bones, you usually light smoke. Juniper is best. Its crackle is sharp, its scent cleansing. The tendrils wrap around the bones, carry them upward into the unseen. Sometimes you whisper a chant. Sometimes you just breathe deeply. Your voice is part of the offering. The smoke is part of the path. If a dream is stubborn or murky, you will leave your yurt. You do not wear boots. You walk barefoot even in cold. You walk to the edge of the camp and then beyond, to the small ridge where wind is stronger and the stars seem closer. There is a rock there, flat-topped, pocked with age. You sit on it, place your bones on your lap, and look into the sky. The stars have their own language. They do not speak in sentences, they speak in presence. When they are absent, that too is a message. On those nights, you feel less human. Not monstrous, not divine, just apart. It's not loneliness. It's the knowledge that you are being watched by things that never blink. The people in camp never ask where you go. They pretend not to notice the mud on your feet in the morning or the ash on your hands, but they know. And they're glad you're the one doing it, because someone must. Someone must walk the edge of dream and waking. Someone must ask questions no one else dares form aloud. Someone must hold the bones and listen when they rattle in their pouch like teeth. And tonight, that someone is you. Your yurt is not just a shelter, it is a boundary, a hinge between worlds, a place where time folds inward and the lines between flesh and spirit blur. From the outside, it looks like any other. Felt panels stretched tight over a frame of bentwood poles, circular and low to the ground, with smoke rising from the central chimney flap. But those who approach know better. They see the strange bundles tied at the entrance, claws, small bones, a bird's skull. They notice the absence of decoration. No family patterns, no colourful weavings, only the raw materials of meaning, fur, wood, horn, ash. Inside, it is always dim. You keep the flap low, letting in little light. The sun is too loud. You prefer the language of shadows. Everything has its place, and everything has its silence. To your left, a shallow bowl filled with ash and the remains of burned juniper. To your right, a stone slab, flat and cold, used only for rites. Across from the door sits your drum, always slightly tilted, as if listening. Above, the smoke hole in the roof breathes slowly, opening and closing with the wind. Some days it whistles, others it hums. You once dreamed it was an eye, and when you woke, you couldn't look up at it for days. The yurt smells of things no one else seems to notice. A trace of dried blood from an offering long ago. The sour tang of damp felt. The soft sweetness of crushed herbs folded into bundles and tucked under floor mats. Hanging from the central beam are objects of power. A foxtail, stiff with age. A disc of polished metal that turns slightly, though there's no breeze. Feathers arranged in the shape of a fan. Raven, mostly, though one is from a bird you cannot name. Each one was given in a dream. You woke with the vision, and you obeyed. Some were found in places they shouldn't have been. One feather drifted down into your yurt while the flap was closed. You still don't know how. There is a corner you never use. It is not for you. It is for them. It holds a simple stone figure, no taller than your hand. Its surface is worn smooth, its face featureless. You found it half buried after a night of thunder, its presence unmistakable. You placed it on a mound of black cloth and left it alone. Sometimes, when you sleep too long beside it, you dream of water rising. Endless, heavy, cold. The kind of cold that never lets go. You still keep it. It has not asked to leave. The yurt creaks with memory. Every object inside it carries weight. Not physical, spiritual. A fur-wrapped rattle tied with red thread. A strip of bark carved with symbols no one taught you. An old drinking horn, never used, filled with dried herbs and sealed with wax. You once tried to remove a bundle of twigs from the wall, only to dream of being watched by wolves for 3 nights. You tied it back up. It hasn't moved since. There are no mirrors inside your yurt. You used to have one, a tolly, round and dull, tied to your chest as tradition required. But one day it cracked without being touched. You buried it in silence. Mirrors are dangerous. They do not reflect. They invite. Now, your reflection lives only in still water, and you do not look often. You sleep in the center of the yurt, near the fire, wrapped in a hide blanket with charms laid beneath your head. You wake often, not from noise, but from stillness. Moments when the air thickens and the fire dims, and you feel not alone. You never speak during those moments. You wait, and eventually the moment passes, or it doesn't, and you drum. The drum opens the way. 3 beats, slow and steady. The first is for waking, the second is for offering, the third is for crossing. After that, there are no rules, only movement, only surrender. When you return, hours later or minutes, the yurt feels changed. Slightly colder, slightly stretched. The corners lean inward. The ceiling seems farther away. And for a while, you are unsure whether you ever left. You measure time not in days, but in changes. The way the light turns thin in autumn. The first breath that clouds the air. The scent of new grass in spring, rising from beneath last year's death. Each season brings its own spirits, its own rules, its own dangers. Winter is the hardest, not just for the cold, though the cold is relentless, not just for the hunger, though you've learned to go without, but because winter is when the spirits come closest. They do not like warmth. They do not like laughter. They slip between cracks in the felt. They curl around your ankles. They whisper in your dreams, louder, sharper, more persistent. You sleep less. You drum more. You drink teas brewed from dried roots and bitter bark. They do not heal, they distance. In winter, the tribe avoids you even more than usual. They know the veil is thin. They fear what you might see or bring back. You perform rituals with little fanfare. A bowl of ice left to melt beside the fire. A line of stones arranged in a spiral, altered slightly each day. Sometimes, a feather placed atop your drum. Not touched, not moved, just watched. If spring is rebirth, winter is memory. And memories return strongest when the world is still. In these months, you visit the burial mounds more often. Not to mourn, but to listen. The ancestors are never louder than when the snow is deep. The silence around you is so complete that every wind becomes a word. Every crow's cry is a sentence. Every crack of ice a reply. You remember one winter in particular. A boy had fallen ill. No fever, no wound. Just gone from himself. He sat by the fire and stared at nothing, lips slightly open, breath shallow. His mother came to you in tears. You said nothing. You walked to the burial ground. You lay face down in the snow for hours. You don't remember falling asleep. You only remember waking, with a name in your mouth. A name long dead. You whispered it into the boy's ear. And his breath caught. His eyes filled with tears. And slowly, he came back. Spring came early that year. Spring is different. It is not softer, only warmer. It brings restlessness. The ground thaws. Birds return. So do dreams. Not all of them are welcome. You find that more people seek your help in spring. They are confused, unsettled. The earth wakes up too quickly. Old fears bloom with the first flowers. You offer comfort where you can. A charm made of eggshell and pine needle. A chant whispered into a bowl of water. A soft rattle shaken near the crown of the head. But you know, most of the healing in spring is not yours to give. It belongs to the land. Summer is balance. The spirits retreat. Food is plenty. Even you feel stronger. You eat more. You sleep better. You walk farther into the hills, sometimes for days. Your yurt is warm and bright. You clean the bones. You repaint symbols on old objects. You tie new feathers into your belt. You perform small blessings for travelers passing through. Sometimes you are given fermented milk, dried cheese, or wool in return. You thank them with a nod, rarely with words. Summer is when you gather herbs, stones, odd shapes from the forest. Not all of it makes sense at the time. You only understand later. when the drum tells you what they're for. Autumn is waiting. The light slants lower, the air cools, and something shifts. It is a quiet tension. The land knows winter is coming. You feel it in your joints, in the way your drum sounds flatter, in the way the smoke takes longer to rise. Dreams become more symbolic. Snakes, spirals, mouths full of earth. You begin fasting again, more often, to clear your mind. Autumn is preparation. You refill your pouches with dried plants. You mend holes in your robe. You hang charms on the outer edge of the yurt. You do not fear winter, but you respect it. You know it will try to pull you under, in spirit if not in body. And you must be ready. The seasons do not ask. They arrive. They demand. And you, as always, must listen. You do not know your full lineage. Few shamans do. You remember your mother's voice. Soft, strong, smelling faintly of goat milk and salt. You remember your father's hands. Rough, calloused, rarely still. But beyond that, it fades. When you first began to hear the spirits, you were young. Too young to understand. Too young to say no. The signs were clear. The long silences. The eyes that didn't blink. The dreams that made you scream in a language you'd never learned. The tribe had only one shaman left then. An old woman, hunched and bird-like, with eyes that shone like wet stone. She came for you without a word, took you from your parents in the night, wrapped in a robe that smelled of blood and sage. They let you go, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. She raised you in her yurt, taught you with glances more than words. Correction came not with anger, but silence. When you made mistakes, she did not scold. She disappeared for hours. You learned quickly. You learned that to be a shaman is not to be powerful. It is to be hollow, a vessel. You do not carry your own will. You carry the will of others, the living, the dead, the unseen. Your teacher died in a summer storm. She left no final words, no ceremony, only her drum sitting beside the fire and a line of red stones leading out of the yurt. You followed them. They led nowhere. You never found her body. That was the last lesson. To vanish quietly, without need, without sound. You buried her drum beside a tree struck by lightning, then carved your own from the hide of a horse that had died in its sleep. An animal too pure for riding, too strange for eating. The spirits accepted it. You knew by the way the wind changed direction the moment you struck it for the first time. You have no apprentice. Not yet. But sometimes, in the camp, you notice a child watching you. A girl, maybe 7 winters old. She doesn't speak much. Carries stones in her pockets. Touches the ground before she answers questions. You've seen her looking at your yurt after sunset. You say nothing. If the spirits want her, they'll make it known. They always do. You think sometimes of what it means to leave no bloodline, no child to carry your face, no name to echo. But you do leave something. Your drum, your bones, your herbs wrapped in animal hide. The stories whispered about you when the wind is high. And most of all, your silence. Because silence is the first lesson, the first inheritance. It teaches patience, observation, humility. It teaches you to wait for the world to speak instead of shouting into it. The greatest shamans do not leave monuments. They leave pauses, moments of stillness in the lives of others. Moments when someone hears a voice they cannot name and wonders where it came from. That is your legacy. And so you sit by the fire in your yurt, wrapped in furs, eyes half closed, drum at your side. The night deepens. The wind presses softly against the felt walls. The fire crackles, then settles, and somewhere beyond the camp, a wolf howls once. Not in hunger, but in recognition. Long before he was called Genghis Khan, before the thunder of his armies shook the steppes, before the name Temujin became legend, there was another voice in his camp, a quieter one, but no less powerful. The voice of a man who did not wear armor, who carried no bow, who did not ride to war, but dreamed of it before it happened. His name was Teb Tengri. To the common folk, he was something like a prophet. To the Khan, for a time, he was an advisor. To the spirits, well, that's harder to say. Teb Tengri did not rise through bloodline or battle. He was not born into greatness, nor chosen by the blade. He was chosen by something older, something no one could quite name. The stories say he was strange from birth, quiet, prone to disappearing for days, even as a boy. He would return covered in dust, eyes distant, speaking of things he shouldn't have known. Storms that hadn't yet come. Deaths that hadn't yet happened. Names no one had spoken in years. He slept alone, even when young. He hated meat, but spoke to bones. Birds would land near him without fear. Horses would stop their galloping when he stared. His family, part of the broader Borjigan clan, knew better than to question. In those days, spiritual power was a mystery to be honored, not explained. It wasn't long before people began to seek him out. For dreams, for healings, for warnings, and eventually, so did Temujin. Back then, Temujin was still clawing his way into power. His path was not yet secure. His alliances were fragile, his enemies numerous. The sky seemed to shift with each decision, and so he did what leaders have always done when the world grew uncertain. He turned to someone who could see beyond it. Teb Tengri was not a man of flattery. He did not bow low before the Khan. He did not chant praises or offer false comfort. He simply stood, barefoot and wrapped in pale robes, and said things that made even hardened warriors fall silent. He told Temujin the names of those who would betray him, sometimes before they did. He predicted the direction of battles, where the enemy would ride, how many would fall, and perhaps more unnerving, he was usually right. This unnerved many in Temujin's camp, especially the warrior brothers of the Khan. Kasar and Belgute, proud men who had spilled blood to elevate their brother. They distrusted Teb Tengri, not just because he was different, but because Temujin began to listen to him, more than to them. When the shaman spoke, Temujin's brow furrowed. When the shaman was silent, Temujin waited. And as victories mounted, so too did Teb Tengri's influence. He did not seek it, but he didn't refuse it either. They say he would walk into the center of camp at dusk, look to the sky, and hum a low vibrating note. And that, when he did, dogs would howl, and children would stop crying. Some said he could speak to the blue sky itself. To Tengri, the eternal spirit of heaven. Whether metaphor or truth, it didn't matter. People began to fear him, and in politics, fear is never without consequence. At first, the Khan welcomed the dreams. They gave him an edge. They gave him clarity. They gave him something his enemies lacked, a whisper from the other side. But dreams are not tools. They are not loyal. They go where they will. And one night, Teb Tengri's dream turned inward. No one knows what he saw, not entirely. but those close to him say he woke before dawn. Pale, shivering, lips pressed tightly shut, he sat by his fire until it died out, then walked barefoot to the Khan's tent. The guards let him pass. He entered without ceremony. Temujin looked up from his seat. No armor that morning, just robes and a piece of dried meat in his hand. Tebtengri did not bow. He spoke slowly, quietly, and what he said would change the shape of the empire. He told Temujin that death was circling, not just around the camp, but around the Khan himself. He spoke of betrayal, of a brother with blood in his mouth, of horses galloping in the wrong direction, of a yurt torn from the earth by wind, spinning until it vanished. He said the spirits no longer whispered, they shouted, and their warning was clear. The sky has turned its face. Temujin said nothing at first. Then carefully he asked, "Who?" Tebtengri did not answer. Or perhaps he gave a name the Khan could not accept. Because the next day, everything changed. The brothers, Kasa and Belgute, had long harbored mistrust, but now they had cause. Tebtengri's warning was too vague, too ominous, too easily twisted, and Temujin hesitated. He asked fewer questions. He delayed decisions. He became quieter, more withdrawn. The camp noticed. The brothers acted. They accused Tebtengri of manipulation, of using dreams as weapons, of sowing fear and doubt to gain power, of turning the Khan away from his own blood. There was no trial, only whispers, only silence. One night, the shaman was called to the Khan's tent again, but this time he was not allowed inside. Instead, he was led away, far from the fires, beyond the circle of yurts, into the dark. There, the brothers waited. They did not strike him with swords. They did not shed his blood, because even then, even in rage, they feared what he was. To spill the blood of a man touched by spirits was to invite them into your dreams. So they used rope, thick and rough, and they choked the breath from him beneath the stars. No witnesses, no words, just silence. And when it was done, they buried his body far from the camp, deep in the grasslands. No marker, no ritual, no songs, only earth and stillness. The next morning, the camp stirred as usual. Fires were lit, milk was warmed, children chased dogs between yurts. The Khan sat in council, stern and silent. No one mentioned the absence, not aloud, but it hung over everything, like smoke that wouldn't rise, like a drum that would not sound. The yurt where Tebtengri had lived remained sealed, his belongings left untouched. His drum, still resting against the inner wall, grew cold. No one dared enter, not even to extinguish the coals. And that night, the wind changed. It came suddenly, from the wrong direction, strong, then still, sharp, then silent. It carried dust that stuck to the skin. It howled once, long and low, then vanished. The old women were the first to speak. They whispered that the spirits were angry, that Tebtengri's body had not been honored, that death had not been given its proper name. Some said they heard drums in their sleep. Others said their dreams filled with birds flying backward. One man claimed he saw the shaman's shadow, not the man, just the shadow, standing beside the fire, not moving. The Khan said nothing, but days passed, then weeks, and small things began to fray. A horse, prized, well-fed, healthy, lay down and never rose again. A scouting party disappeared without sign. A child was born without breath, though the mother was strong. The warriors grew uneasy, and Temujin, he began to look at the sky differently, not as an ally, but as a question. One night, as the fires dimmed and the camp grew quiet, the story began to spread. No one knew who started it, but it passed quickly, like smoke through fabric, like breath through a reed. It said that Teb Tengri had not left, that his soul, denied ritual, had nowhere to go, that it walked behind the living, listened to the council meetings, whispered in the ears of horses before battle. Some believed he was reborn as a bird, a black one, seen often now, circling alone. Others said he lived in the wind itself, that when it blew across the tents without cause, it was him. One woman, old, nearly blind, swore she saw his footprints in the frost outside her yurt. They were bare and faced inward. She burned her offerings twice after that. Temujin, for his part, never spoke his name again. Not publicly, but those closest to him noticed a change. He kept a stone in his robes, a smooth, flat disc, not precious, not carved. It resembled the kind shamans used for divining. He touched it often during war councils, rolled it between his fingers when he thought no one was watching, and he never again allowed a shaman to stand so close. The role of spirit advisor was left unfilled, at least in name, but sometimes, before great battles, the Khan would still walk alone, far from the camp, into the hills, with no guards, no sword, and when he returned, he would speak with certainty, as if he had been told something by someone. Years passed. The empire grew. The Khan became more than a man. He became a storm, a law, a legend. Temujin was no longer just a name. He was Chinggis Khan, the world shaker, the sky's hammer, the rider of fate. Cities burned, nations bent, and still, somewhere in the corners of the campfires, Teb Tengri's name lingered, quiet, unspoken, but never forgotten. It became taboo, but not erased. And in Mongol tradition, what is not erased becomes something else. A lesson, a warning, a myth. They said his spirit never found peace, not because he was angry, but because he was unfinished. The sky had touched him, but men had silenced him before he was done speaking. Some claimed his soul became a wind that only the dying could hear. Others believed he was reborn again and again, not as a man, but as a voice inside other shamans, whispering half-truths, riddles, warnings too vague to ignore. In remote regions, long after the empire fractured, shamans began to tie black cloth near their drums, a gesture of mourning, not for the dead, but for the forgotten. They would mutter words not found in prayer books, shake rattles carved in patterns older than any alphabet, and burn juniper until the air turned thick with memory. Some said they were honoring Teb Tengri. Others said they were trying to keep him away, because a spirit-denied peace becomes a mirror, and to look into it is to see things you may not want to know. His story lingered in the spaces between faiths. When Buddhism spread across Mongolia, when Islam took root in Western clans, when Christian priests passed through the steppes, the shamans held quiet gatherings, not in temples, not in yurts, but in caves, in forests, on hilltops marked by nothing but a single twisted tree. There the name Teb Tengri was whispered again, not as a hero, not as a god, but as a reminder of what happens when the voice of spirit is silenced by the voice of power. No written record from that time survives with his true words. No scroll bears his chants. No official histories name him more than once. Often just as a troublesome seer or a heretic sage. But in oral memory, he is still walking. Old women hum songs said to come from his dreams. Bone throwers speak of visions in which his face appears, eyes closed, mouth open, as if still mid-sentence. One wandering monk centuries later wrote in his diary, "I met a man on the road who spoke only in riddles. He wore no shoes, and his hair was full of ash. He said nothing of himself, only that he had seen a Khan die before he lived. And so, the story never ends. Because Teb Tengri was never just one man. He became something more elusive, the part of history that slips between words, the flicker of movement in the corner of your eye, the name you almost remember but can't quite place. He was what every empire fears, a truth that cannot be buried, a voice that echoes even after the rope has tightened and the camp has moved on. Because you can strangle a man, but not a warning. And Teb Tengri was a warning, wrapped in silence, delivered by the sky itself. History remembers Genghis Khan, but behind his rise were many hands, and not all of them lifted swords. His brothers, Qasr and Belgute, were warriors through and through. They fought beside him in youth, when food was scarce and trust even scarcer. They guarded him when no one else would. And they hated Teb Tengri, not just for what he was, but for what he represented. They did not understand spirits. They did not trust dreams. They had fought too long, bled too often, to surrender power to a man who didn't ride or kill. To them, war was real. Steel was real. Strategy, loyalty, and bloodlines. These were real, but dreams, smoke, bones that could speak, that was a kind of power they couldn't predict. And what cannot be predicted becomes dangerous. They watched as Teb Tengri grew closer to the Khan, as his voice grew weightier in council, as warriors began to look at him with more than fear, with belief. And when belief takes root, it spreads, like fire, like frost. So they conspired, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. They believed they were saving Temujin. They believed the spirits had lied, that Teb Tengri had mistaken vision for ambition. They saw the Khan hesitate after the dream, and hesitation in war is death. In their minds, they were not killing a man. They were preserving the future of the empire. But history doesn't care about intentions, only echoes, and their act would echo forever. No one knows what happened to Teb Tengri's drum. Some say it was taken from his yurt after his death. Others say it remained untouched, slowly gathering dust and silence. One traveler's tale, written generations later, claimed to have seen a drum half buried in earth near the Onon River. It was cracked down the center, its frame bent. But when touched, it hummed. Whether that tale is truth or folklore hardly matters, because in the world of shamanism, drums are more than instruments. They are vehicles, mounts, bridges between the seen and unseen. To destroy a shaman's drum is to sever the path home. Some whispered that the brothers buried it themselves, that they feared its power even after death, that they wrapped it in cloth, placed it in a hollow in the earth, and said no prayers. Others believed it was hidden by followers, young shamans who saw what had happened and vowed to preserve at least one piece of the voice that had been silenced. Regardless of where it went, the absence was felt, Later, shamans said that for a generation, drums across the steppes sounded thinner, that no trance went as deep, that the spirits were harder to reach. They called it the silence of the sky, not because the heavens had stopped speaking, but because someone had dared interrupt the listener. They say Teb Tengri had no family, no children, no heirs. But in a quiet corner of the plains, long after his name was forbidden in council tents, there lived a woman who never took another husband. Her name was Ekejin. She spoke little, she laughed rarely, and she wore a strip of black cloth wrapped around her right arm, always. Some called her mad, others called her a widow. She never corrected either. She lived apart from the others, not quite outside the camp, but not truly within it. Her yurt was small, its felt faded, patched with hide and ash cloth. Children were told not to go near it. She never offered bread to visitors. She never asked for help. But in the spring, she would lay feathers along the hillside, not scattered, arranged, always in the shape of a circle, with one feather in the center, standing upright in a bowl of red earth. No one dared disturb it. Even the goats avoided the spot. She spoke to the sky at dusk, only in winter, only when the wind came from the north. Old men claimed she had once been Teb Tengri's companion. Not a wife, not by tradition, but something stranger, more sacred, the kind of bond that lives beneath language. Two souls bound by vision, not vow. They said she was the one who dressed him after trance, who sat beside him while he shook from visions, who heard his final dream and wept before he even spoke. No one ever saw her cry again. When Teb Tengri vanished from camp, Ekejin said nothing. She did not plead. She did not accuse. She simply moved her yurt 3 horse lengths farther from the others. And there she stayed, for years, through storms and frost and years of famine. She lived on roots, boiled bark, dried berries. She took nothing, she did not gather herself. Some believed she spoke to his spirit. Others believed she had become something in between, not fully spirit, not fully mortal. Once, when a fever swept through the lower tents, she appeared at a family's door, uninvited. She laid 3 stones in a triangle near the fire, hung a twisted thread from the ceiling beam, and left without a word. The fever broke that night. No one thanked her. They didn't know how. When she died, quietly, in her sleep, wrapped in the same robe she'd worn since youth, there were no mourners, but the wind rose that night, and the clouds formed a spiral over the valley. A boy claimed he heard a drumbeat in the earth beneath his feet. His mother said it was thunder, but thunder doesn't repeat in threes, and it doesn't stop the birds from singing. They buried Ekejin near the northern slope, but no marker was placed. Only a single feather, upright, in a bowl of red earth. And the next morning, it was gone. Empires are loud things. They expand with banners. They announce themselves with fire and hoofbeats. They tell stories in steel. But some of their most permanent changes happen in silence. Teb Tengri's death was not declared. No herald rode through the grasslands. No message was sent. No shrine was raised. And yet, his absence changed the shape of what followed. Shamans, once welcomed in the courts of warlords, began to vanish from the central councils. They weren't outlawed, not at first, but they were watched, pushed gently outward. The Khan still consulted signs, still looked to omens, but the intermediaries were chosen more carefully now, more politically. The rise of Buddhist monks began in earnest not long after. Then came the Nestorian priests, then the Islamic scholars, with scrolls and arguments and stars arranged into maps. Each brought its own truths, each brought its own language for the unseen, but none drummed, none fasted until the body vanished, none slept in caves to dream the future. The old shamans, the ones who remained, became wanderers, advisors to villages, not khans, called upon for birth, for death, for illness, but not for matters of war. The empire marched on. It grew, it flourished, but the drumbeat faded, and the spiritual heart of the Mongol world shifted from earth to sky, from trance to text, from vision to doctrine. Still, not all forgot. In the western steppes, along the shadowed ridges of the Altai Mountains, there were stories of a barefoot prophet, a man who rode no horse, who carried a mirror that never showed reflections, who walked in circles beneath the moon, and warned of a curse that had not yet fallen. No name was given, only whispers, only references to a time before the empire had teeth. Children were told to listen for the wind, not the kind that brought snow, but the kind that made no sound. If you felt it pass through you, it meant you'd been seen, and once seen, you might begin to dream things that hadn't happened yet. You may wonder, why tell the story of a man who disappeared? Why recall the dreamer when the sword was the one that carved history? Because the sword ends a life, but the dream changes what comes after. And though Tebtengri's body was buried without words, his absence taught something that no teacher dared speak. That spiritual power is dangerous, not because it destroys, but because it reminds. It reminds rulers that they are not alone, that somewhere beyond the veil of plans and armies, there is something listening, something older than conquest, something that does not bow, and if you silence its voice, it may return in other forms, gentler, slower, but no less true. Years later, long after the Khan had died, a child was born to a herder's family near the banks of the Kurlan River. He was quiet from birth, did not cry often, did not laugh when others laughed, but he listened, more deeply than most, and when he turned 8 winters old, he began to speak in a voice that was not his, not frightening, not strange, just old. He would say things no child should know, the names of herbs he'd never touched, the burial customs of tribes that no longer existed. He drew symbols in the dirt, then forgot them. When asked how he knew, he would simply shrug and say, "I heard it in the drum." His parents had no drum, no teacher, no explanation. They took him to the village shaman, who listened, watched, then sat very still. She asked only one question. "Do you dream of a man who walks with no shadow?" The boy nodded, and the shaman said no more. She burned juniper that night until the stars were hidden, and the next morning, the boy was different, not healed, not ill, just quieter, as if someone had finished saying what they needed to say. Some paths close behind us, others stay open, even if no one walks them. The life of Tebtengri was a path like that, worn, silent, half forgotten, but still there beneath the grass. Those who seek it don't always know what they're looking for. They hear a strange drumbeat in a dream, or feel the wind press too closely to their back, or find a feather where no bird has flown, and they pause. That pause is the door, because the work of the spirit never truly ends. It waits, it listens, it passes from breath to breath, from dream to dream, until someone remembers enough to ask again. And when they do, perhaps, just perhaps, they'll hear a voice say, "Be careful what you dream. It might already be watching you." To most it looks simple. A circle of wood, a stretched skin, a handle, a drum. But to a shaman, it is a door, not one that swings open, but one that vibrates, that hums, that dissolves the boundary between waking and dream. The Mongolian shaman's drum is made with great care. Nothing is random. Nothing is bought in a market. First, there is the frame, usually round, to match the sky, carved from birch or willow, soaked until it bends, then shaped by hand, tied with sinew, and left to dry in silence. The skin is next. Horsehide, most often. Not just any horse, but one seen in a dream, one that offered itself, one that knew it would not be ridden, but ridden through. The skin is stretched tight over the frame. Not too tight, not too loose. It must sound like wind through ribs, like hooves on frozen earth, like the first heartbeat after stillness. Symbols are often painted onto the surface, not for decoration, for direction. Some mark the four winds. Some trace the path to the underworld. Others simply appear, in dreams, in visions, and must be included, even if their meaning isn't yet clear. The beater, the stick used to strike the drum, is wrapped in leather or fur, not to soften the sound but to show respect. The drum is not struck in anger. It is invited. You don't play the drum for music. You play it to leave. The first beat calls attention. The second beat offers your name. The third opens the way. Beyond that, you do not count. You follow. Your body may stay seated, eyes half closed, but your spirit goes into the wind, into the bones, into the darkness beneath the earth where the ancestors wait. Some shamans sing, some hum, some chant words no one taught them. The drum changes you. Your fingers tingle, your chest tightens. Your thoughts melt like wax near a flame. Sometimes you cry without knowing why. Sometimes you laugh. Sometimes you stop being aware that you are drumming at all. And when you return, everything is quieter, heavier, more real. The drum doesn't just carry you to the spirits. It brings something back, always. There is a quietness in bones, a stillness that waits, unmoving, but never empty. To most, they are just remnants, what's left behind when life departs. But to a shaman, bones are messengers, vessels of memory, lanterns that glow with unseen fire. Each bone carries a history, a texture, a sound, the vertebra of a sheep, the rib of a fox, the tooth of a deer, not gathered randomly, but found or given at the right time, in the right place, when the world is quiet enough to notice. They are smoothed with oils, etched with lines from dreams, and carried in leather pouches, close to the heart or near the hip. When questions arise, when omens are uncertain, when illness has no cause, the bones are cast, not thrown, cast. There's a difference. They fall onto felt or earth, not too hard, not too soft. And then they speak. Their positions are read not like a map, but like a melody. Two bones touching might mean unity. A bone turned away could suggest betrayal. One standing upright, balance. One hidden under cloth, a secret not ready to be seen. The shaman doesn't interpret with logic. They feel. They lean their head to one side, close one eye and let the silence shape meaning. Sometimes the bones reveal nothing. That too is a message. And then there are the antlers. To wear antlers is to wear the memory of another being. A being who saw without words, who moved through forests without leaving footprints, who listened more than it spoke. There were places in the spirit realm where even the drum could not follow. And sometimes the shaman returned weaker, not from failure, but from the toll. A healed patient might rise stronger, but the shaman might limp for days, might forget their own name for a while, might lose color in their eyes, because healing was never one-sided. You gave something to get something, and the spirits always took their share. But when it worked, when the sickness eased, when the child stood, when the dream broke like ice under spring wind, the people did not cheer. They whispered, they bowed their heads, because the spirit had been persuaded and the soul had returned. And that was not something to celebrate, only something to respect. A shaman's tools are not bought. They are not made for show. They are not crafted in haste, nor passed between hands casually. They are given, or they appear, sometimes in dreams, sometimes on a path walked 100 times and never noticed until that one morning. Sometimes in a pouch left behind by someone who never said goodbye. Each object carries a presence, a weight, not of mass, but of meaning. And the shaman must listen closely to understand what it wants. An antler might call to you in a dream, not because it is beautiful, but because it knows. It may rest beneath snow for years, waiting, until you walk the right path with the right question in your chest. You pick it up. You say nothing. You carry it home. And you do not ask why. You'll know when the time comes. Some shamans inherit their teacher's tools, but not always all at once. A drum may be left behind, but won't speak for years. A mirror might crack, then heal itself in firelight. These things are not dead. They are not passive. They choose their next bearer, and sometimes they choose no one. Dreams are often the first source. You wake with a symbol in your hand, not literally, but you feel it there. A shape, a texture, a sound you've never heard, but cannot forget. You carve it into wood. You paint it onto hide. You wrap it around your wrist, and only later, months or years, do you discover its purpose, because that's the rhythm of shamanic tools. Meaning comes after the making. A gift first, understanding second, and sometimes never at all. One shaman told a story near the end of his life. He had worn a crooked piece of bone near his belt for 40 years, found it as a boy beside a stream, tied it to leather without knowing why, never removed it. Only when he lay dying did he dream of a bird made of smoke, who sang in a voice like wind through ice. It said, "That bone belonged to your mother's mother's mother. She was the last to sing the fire quiet." He smiled and passed without fear. So the tools stay, long after the hand is gone, long after the songs have faded, long after the yurt has collapsed into dust. The drum remembers, the bones remember, the antler remembers, and maybe somewhere out on the steppe there is a thread, still fluttering in the wind, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Sound matters, not just the drum, not just the chant, but everything. Every rustle of cloth, every clink of metal, every inhale before a vision begins. In ritual, nothing is random. Even silence is chosen. Many shamans use rattles, not toys, not noisemakers, but tools with their own rhythm, made from dried gourds, carved wood, or stitched hide, filled with small stones, teeth, or seeds. The sound is soft, a whisper of rain, the breath of ancestors through dry grass. Some rattles carry symbols on their surface, spirals, stars, antlers, eyes, not for decoration, but to guide the spirit through the sound. The shaman shakes it not to drive away, but to invite. Each movement is careful. The sound wraps around the listener. It pushes thought aside. It makes room for something older. There are also mouth sounds, low hums, breath through the teeth, clicks of the tongue, grunts shaped into meaning. You might hear a shaman speak to fire, but not in words, in rhythm, in vibration. And the fire answers, not with voice, but with the way it bends, or the direction the smoke flows. You listen, you always listen, because the sound is not background, it is the path. And when it stops, when the silence comes, that's when the message arrives, not in volume, but in the pause. Segment 3, Part 9, Keeping the Tools Alive. Shamanic tools are not stored. They are not shelved. They are not put away like possessions. They are companions. You sleep beside your drum. Even when you're not planning to use it, it stays near the fire, not for warmth, but to listen. Some say the drum hears your dreams, and that when it grows cold, it forgets who you are. So you keep it close. The bones are wrapped in cloth, not tight, just enough to rest. You do not throw them randomly. You ask them. Before casting, you whisper. You breathe on them. Sometimes, you even touch your forehead to the pouch. Respect is not a ritual. It's a relationship. The bones will not lie, but they will refuse to speak. Antlers are oiled, polished with smoke, retied with fresh cloth during the solstice. Some shamans hang theirs above the bed. Others bury them in snow when visions grow too loud. When you wear them, you are watched by animals, by spirits, by yourself. So you learn to move differently, not slowly, but with awareness, as if the tools are watching your thoughts, not your hands. You feed your mirror, not with food, but with firelight. Once a season, you hold it to the flames. Let it drink the shadows. Let it blink. You never look too long. Not because you fear what you'll see, but because you respect what's looking back. When a shaman dies, the tools are not buried. Not always. Sometimes they are passed down. Other times, they are returned. To the earth, to the cave, to the wind. But one thing is certain. They are not forgotten. Because forgetting them would mean forgetting the language they spoke. And even now, centuries later, you can still hear it, if you know what to listen for. A tool is not always something you hold. Sometimes it holds you. The yurt of a shaman is more than shelter, more than felt walls and wooden beams. It is a container of spirits, a living object. Every placement inside has meaning. The drum faces the door, not because it's polite, but because it guards the threshold. The fire sits in the center, because everything begins there. Light, heat, smoke. A rising thread that touches the ceiling and vanishes into the sky. The smoke hole, that round opening above the fire, is not just a vent, it is an eye. It watches. Some shamans speak to it before they speak to people. They throw herbs into the fire and ask the smoke to carry messages upward. If it rises straight, the spirits are listening. If it swirls, they are confused. If it won't rise at all, they are angry. The northern wall of the yurt is sacred. No one sits there except the shaman. Above it, objects may hang. Antlers, stones, small carved symbols tied with horsehair. The eastern wall might hold mirrors, to catch the first light of day, to reflect dreams that linger after waking. The western wall is for rest, a mat, a fur, a place where the shaman lies but does not truly sleep. Sleep in a shaman's yurt is not escape, it is invitation. Even the floor is a kind of map. Where things fall matters. Where someone stands matters more. To step without awareness is to insult the unseen. So guests move carefully, feet low, eyes cast downward. They know this space is not empty, it's full of watchers. Segment 3, Part 11. When tools refuse to work. The tools are alive, and like all living things, they grow tired. A drum might stop sounding right, not broken, just quiet. You strike it, and the tone feels hollow. That's not failure. That's refusal. Sometimes the drum needs to rest, or to be fed, or to be burned with juniper until it remembers what it is. The bones might land in patterns that mean nothing. You throw them once, twice, still nothing. It doesn't mean the answer isn't there. It means you're not asking the right question. So you wait, fast, walk into the hills. Let the land rearrange your thoughts, then cast again. Mirrors crack for no reason. Threads unravel while you sleep. An antler falls from its hook, even though the air is still. These are not accidents. These are messages. The spirits are always speaking. But the tools are the language. And if the language becomes unreadable, then the silence has meaning. Sometimes it's a warning. Do not go forward. Sometimes it's a test. Will you listen without tools? And sometimes it's grief. A spirit you've worked with has moved on. A part of your soul has shifted. The tool no longer fits. You must wait for the new one to appear. And it will. In a dream, in a fire, in a sound you've never heard, but recognize. And in that moment, you'll understand again what every shaman learns, that the tools are not yours. They are lent, and they choose you, not the other way around. You would think that a Khan, a man with armies at his back, horses without number, gold taken from cities far beyond the steppe, would not ask permission. And yet, before battles, before marriages, shamans often wear them during trance. A headpiece fashioned from deer or elk, sometimes even reindeer in the northern regions, tied with sinew, adorned with feathers, wrapped in cloth. They do not make the shaman powerful. They remind the shaman that power is borrowed. That vision doesn't always come from eyes. That seeing isn't always about looking. Some believe the antlers open pathways in the skull, letting spirits enter through the crown and exit through the breath. Others say they confuse evil spirits, who cannot tell if the shaman is man, beast, or something in between. And maybe that's the point, because shamans are not meant to be known. They are meant to be crossed through, like wind, like smoke, like shadow. There is a reason shamans burn things, not to destroy, but to reveal. Smoke is a bridge. It carries prayer upward and vision downward. It softens the boundaries between the seen and the unseen. The most common offering is juniper. Gathered fresh in summer, dried in shade, broken by hand. It crackles when it burns. A sharp, fragrant smoke. Pine and earth. Something alive that has become something else. The smoke fills the yurt slowly. It doesn't rush. It curls. It finds corners, clings to bone, wraps around antlers, mirrors, drums. And when the air grows thick, that's when the work begins. Shamans inhale deeply, not for pleasure, not for power, but to let the smoke carry them into memory, into questions, into the realm where spirits wait without faces. It's not about hallucination, it's about threshold, a moment between two breaths where the world becomes porous, and meanings slide between layers. And then there are mirrors, not the polished silver-backed kind used for vanity. These are called toli, roughly made, rounded or oval, hung from belts, worn on the chest, tied to headpieces. At first glance, they seem dull, but in firelight they flicker. Some say they reflect more than faces, that if you look too long, you may see someone else, or something waiting behind your own eyes. Shamans use them to deflect, to confuse malevolent spirits, to reflect harm back to its sender, but also to focus, to gaze until the surface melts, until vision becomes dream, until you're no longer looking at something, but through it. Toli are never made casually. Some are handed down. Some are found in visions. Some must be hidden for years before they're ready. One tale tells of a shaman who buried her mirror for a decade. Only when lightning struck the ground above it did she dig it back up. And only then did it begin to speak. Smoke and mirrors, two tools often misunderstood. But for the shaman, they are lungs and eyes. The smoke lets you breathe between worlds. The mirror lets you see through them. And both are reminders that truth is not solid, that what we see is never the whole, and that sometimes the clearest vision comes when everything is obscured. The clothing of a shaman is not worn for beauty. It is not fashionable. It is not meant to impress the living. It speaks to someone else entirely. Every piece is a message, every thread a prayer, every added tooth, bone, feather, or scrap of metal, a note in an ongoing song. When a shaman dresses for ritual, they are not preparing to be seen. They are preparing to be unseen, or rather, seen by things that do not care for faces. Begin with the robe, often made of hide or felt, heavy, worn, dark with years of use. It is rarely washed, not from neglect, but because washing removes memory, removes scent, removes what the spirits recognize. Some robes are adorned with iron discs, small, thin, and dull, hung in rows or scattered across the chest. They clink softly when the shaman moves, a sound like distant rain. Some say they attract helpful spirits. Others say they reflect evil away. Both may be true. Cloth strips are often tied to the arms, red, blue, green, not for color, but for meaning. Red for blood and breath, blue for sky, green for the earth below. The robe becomes a map, a constellation, a living garment that says to the spirits, I am ready, I am listening, I am open. Then come the threads, wrapped around wrists, braided into hair, stitched into belts. Some are made from horsehair, others from sinew or twisted root. None are random. A thread tied during illness might never be removed. A thread knotted after a dream might signal a vow, even if the shaman doesn't know yet what the vow is for. There is no ceremony for this, just instinct, just silence. And then, the small things, teeth, claws, bird bones, beads of stone with no hole yet drilled. They are sewn into the robe, hung from cords, tucked into pockets near the heart, not as trophies, but as companions. The tooth of a fox is said to lend cunning in dreams. The claw of an owl, silent sight. A crow's feather near the throat might aid speech with the dead. Sometimes the shaman does not remember where the item came from. They simply know it must be worn. And when the garment is complete, not perfect, not beautiful, but complete, the shaman steps inside it and vanishes a little. Not literally, but something softens. Their outline becomes less sharp. Their voice changes. They are no longer entirely here, nor entirely gone. They are dressed not for a journey, but as one. Not all animals are sacred, but some are more than animals. To the shaman, a wolf is not simply a wolf. A bear is not simply a bear. An eagle is not merely a bird. They are signals, guides, emissaries from the other side of the breath. Each animal carries its own wisdom, not in words but in shape, in presence, in the way it enters a dream and the feeling it leaves behind. The wolf comes at dusk, not snarling, not hunting, watching, always just beyond the firelight. It is the guide. To see a wolf in vision is to be reminded of the path, not just where it leads, but where it began. Wolves are tied to ancestors, to loyalty, to morning songs sung only in the wind. Some shamans wear a strip of wolf fur tied near the ankle, to move through dreams in silence, to avoid being noticed by spirits who are not yet ready to speak. The eagle comes at height, in wind, in light too bright to stare into. It is the eye that sees what cannot be named. Eagles are not messengers. They are vision itself. A shaman might dream of flying, not over land, but over time, seeing not events, but meanings. To wear a single eagle feather, one must have seen a storm and not turned away. Not metaphorically, literally. Storms are tests, not of strength, but of presence. Those who remain still in thunder, who listen to what the lightning says. They may be gifted a feather, if found, if earned. The bear does not come gently. It arrives in illness, in fear, in challenge. But it is not a punishment. The bear is strength, but not force. Stillness, but not weakness. To dream of a bear is to be reminded, you are a body, you are a weight, you are allowed to rest. Some shamans fear the bear spirit because it does not speak, it only is. But those who follow its silence often return with new songs, heavier, lower, more rooted. And then there are the places where these animals arrive. Not in the village, not in ceremony, but far from others. Dreaming places, cliff edges with no name, caves filled with birdsong and the scent of wet stone, open fields where wind moves in spirals, even when there is no wind. These places are not marked on any map. They are found when the spirit is ready. A shaman may sleep there for one night, or 3, or not at all. They fast. They lie on earth. They listen. Sometimes they return with new bones, sometimes with new songs, sometimes with nothing but a feeling that they were seen. That is enough. In the old ways there was no word for sickness as we know it. Not just fever, not just wounds. Illness was something more, something misplaced, something stuck between worlds, a bad dream that wouldn't let go, a shadow that followed too closely, a silence that settled into the lungs and made breath heavy. The body could ache, but the cause might lie elsewhere, in the spirit, in the ancestors, in a forgotten promise or an angry place. When someone fell ill, truly ill, they would come to the shaman, not always willingly, not always soon, but when the remedies failed, when the child would not wake, when the hunter could not stop coughing, they would come, not with pride, but with milk, or cloth, or a bundle of herbs tied with red string. They would sit at the edge of the yurt, eyes down, breath held, and the shaman would listen, not to words, to the space between them, to the way the flame flickered, to how the smoke moved, to whether the bones felt heavy in the pouch. The healing did not begin with medicine. It began with seeing. Sometimes the shaman would enter trance. Sometimes they would fast. Sometimes they would drum. Not to leave the world, but to walk into the wound, to go where the sickness had rooted itself, to speak with it, to bargain, to call back the part of the soul that had fled, because that was the deepest belief. That sickness meant something had left, a piece of the self, frightened, lost, stolen, and the shaman's task was to bring it home. These journeys were not poetic. They were tiring, dangerous. He waited, not for generals, not for princes, but for someone older, someone quieter, a shaman. The royal tent was larger than most, double-walled, roped with silk cords, fragrant from the resin burned day and night to please the ancestors. Its poles were carved with scenes of conquest, mountains, rivers, burning cities, but tucked near the rear. Small symbols were scratched into the wood, not by the artisans, by spirit workers. They did it in secret, often at night, to remind the emperor that even in a place of gold, the spirits still listened. The Khan would sit on a raised platform, fur beneath him, a bowl of fermented mare's milk near his feet. His counselors would speak of maps, alliances, threats, and when they finished, they would fall silent, waiting. The shaman would approach last. No armor, no weapons, only a pouch, a drum, a smell of smoke and mountain wind. And when they spoke, the tent quieted. Even the emperor leaned forward, not because the words were always true, but because the possibility was too great to ignore. A battle might be delayed because a dream had warned of rain. A coronation might shift by a single hour because the smoke rose crookedly when the fire was lit. To outsiders, it seemed strange. Why would such power bow to bone and feather? But Mongol Khans knew. The empire rested not just on horses, but on permission. The sky itself, Tengri, could grant victory or take it away without warning. And the shaman was the only one who could ask. In the grand encampments of the Mongol elite, where yurts stretched for miles, where soldiers sharpened swords and merchants counted coins, there was always one tent, with no guards, no banner, no gold, no noise, and yet everyone gave it space. This was the spirit tent. It stood slightly apart, not isolated, but clearly different. Its felt was darker, its frame older, its smoke sharper. It was where the shaman worked, not the village healer, not the traveling bone thrower, but the court shaman, the one chosen to serve the Khan himself. Inside it was dim, a single lamp, a low fire. Drums leaned in corners like sleeping animals. Bones were wrapped in blue cloth and stored in bowls. Feathers hung from cords overhead, twisting gently when no wind blew. It was not beautiful, but it was alive. The elite did not enter lightly. They removed weapons. They bowed their heads. And if the shaman was deep in trance, they waited or left, because whatever business they brought, It was never more important than the conversation already happening. On the other side of breath, here, the spirits were asked questions no one dared voice elsewhere. Would the sun survive the winter? Was the general truly loyal? Would the Khan's soul be accepted when he died? The shaman would listen to smoke, drum, fast, whisper into bowls of water. Sometimes they slept inside the yurt for days, not eating, letting dreams pull the truth forward like thread through a needle. When they emerged, the answer might be a sentence, a song, a shape drawn in ash, or nothing at all, because some answers were not ready, and some were never meant to be known. When the answer did come, it was treated with the weight of a royal decree, not because it was law, but because it came from a place no law could reach. Even the great Khan had no power there. And so he listened. No army moved without ceremony. No campaign began without silence. Not even the great Mongol hordes, with their precision, their swiftness, their devastating coordination, were allowed to ride before the spirits had been consulted. The battlefield may have belonged to generals, but the space before the battle belonged to the shaman. On the morning before a march, the camp would rise early. Even the horses seemed quieter, as if they knew something unseen was being asked. The fires burned blue, the sky was watched, and the shamans, 2 or 3, handpicked, prepared their tools, not in secret, but not in spectacle either. Their ritual was neither hidden nor announced. It simply happened, like frost forming, like thunder that begins far away, just on the edge of hearing. The Khan did not command these rituals. He attended them. He stood, cloaked and still, while the shamans laid out bones, lit strands of dried herbs, tied strips of red cloth to their sleeves, one for each of the 4 directions. They would begin to drum, slow, software, a rhythm not made for the ears, but for the boundary between things. Some warriors closed their eyes. Others whispered under their breath. No one moved. The shamans called the spirits of the land, not to help, but to acknowledge, to say, "We are riding through your territory. We know you are here." Then they called to the ancestors, the old Khans, the warriors who had died in battle, the mothers who gave birth to leaders, the ones who remembered what it was like before names had weight. Their names were spoken into the smoke. If a bird flew overhead at the right moment, it was a sign. If the smoke rose cleanly, permission had been granted. If it scattered, if it clung low to the ground, the shaman would hesitate. They might postpone the march. They might ask for another offering. Milk, blood, silver, time. The Khan would wait, even if the generals bristled, because to ride without permission was to invite a kind of defeat no army could explain. When the ritual was complete, the shamans would fall silent. Sometimes they wept, not from sadness, but from the exhaustion of holding too many voices at once. The Khan would place his hand on his chest, bow once, and leave. The march would begin, but the spirits would ride first, always. Power is never quiet for long, even in the steppe, even beneath a wide sky. Whispers always gather around the throne. The Khan's decisions shaped empires, but behind the curtain, there were other voices, softer, sharper, quieter, and among them, the queens. A Mongol queen was no ornament. She was land. She was bloodline. She was alliance and legacy and threat all at once. And like her husband, she had questions. She did not always trust her rivals, her co-wives, her husband's sons from other lineages, or even her own children, once they became old enough to scheme. So she too turned to the spirits, but not in public, not before the court. She would send for the shaman, in the dead of night, with only one lamp burning and a child asleep in the corner. The shaman would arrive cloaked in smoke and cold air. No guard would stop them. Their steps were quiet, not to avoid being heard, but because they were not meant to belong fully to this place. In the Queen's yurt, the questions were different. Not, will I win the war, but whom can I trust? Is my son safe? Is the girl born under the pale moon truly mine? These were the secrets no general could answer. Only the spirits knew. The shaman did not always answer, but the way they looked at someone the next day might be enough. One glance could shift the marriage. A pause before speaking could ruin an alliance. And so, fear crept into the court, not of battle, but of silence, of smoke that curled too close, of dreams that came after the shaman looked at you for too long. Children, too, were watched. The Khan's sons were groomed for war, the daughters for marriage. But some children were strange, born during eclipses, born with eyes that never fully opened, born laughing. These were brought to the shamans, to be examined, to be read, to be named, sometimes not with a word, but with a feather or a knot or a stone placed in their palm. Some were blessed, some were hidden, and a few were kept away from the court entirely. The shaman never explained why. In this way, the court lived in two layers, one of politics and one of prophecy. The Khans ruled the land, but the shamans ruled the air around it. The empire stretched too far to stay silent. From the forests of Siberia, to the rivers of Persia, to the high plateaus of Tibet, new voices arrived. Each one claimed truth. Some wore crimson robes and turned prayer wheels in their hands. Some wore black cloaks and carried books. Some traced their faith in the stars or in the silence between verses of scripture. They brought gifts. They brought warnings. They brought laws that had never been written in the wind. And slowly, they made their way into the court. The Khans, curious by nature, did not resist them at first. They welcomed monks, debated with priests, listened to imams read from their holy texts by firelight. They wanted to know who spoke most clearly to the sky. But the shamans watched all of this from the edge. They were not threatened. At first, because they did not preach. They did not claim. They did not promise salvation. They offered only experience. A bone cast on the ground. A dream drawn in ash. A silence that told the truth more sharply than words. The tension rose slowly. A Buddhist monk might claim that spirits were illusions. A Muslim scholar might say the spirits were jinn, deceptive and dangerous. A Christian priest might call the shaman a pagan. The court grew divided, not violently, but with questions that split the air in two. What is holy? Whose truth leads us home? Can a man speak to spirits? If the spirits are no longer allowed to speak, some emperors tried to keep peace. One Khan built a yurt palace for every faith. One for the monks, one for the mullahs, one for the shamans. He walked between them in the same day, burned incense, listened, ate in silence. He died without naming a favorite. Others chose differently. One emperor banned trance rituals. Another outlawed the drum entirely. One shaman was accused of witchcraft. and vanished before judgment could be passed. His bones were never found, but every winter after, the palace roof let in snow. Even when no hole could be seen, the shamans never protested. They did not write. They did not argue. They simply moved farther from the camp. Their fires burned quieter. Their words became shorter, but their presence never left. They still lit juniper beneath the stars, still tied cloth to the trees, still placed stones where no road had ever run. And when the Khan's army fell ill, or a dream came to the queen that left her screaming, it was not the priest they called. It was the one with the pouch of bones, the one who had never claimed to be right, only ready. No door slams in silence. It drifts shut. The court shaman did not vanish in a single night. There was no decree, no exile, no fire. Just less space, less time, less listening. The Khans became emperors. The tents became palaces. Stone replaced hide. Gold replaced felt. And with each change, the fire in the center of the room burned smaller. Where once a shaman's voice had followed the drum, now it followed protocol. Meetings were scheduled. Visitors were listed. Even spirit work needed approval. You could not drum at dusk without permission. You could not speak of omens in council. You could not leave bones at the threshold of a general's tent, not unless you had rank. But the spirits did not follow rank. And so, the shamans grew quieter. A few remained near the court, older ones, respected for their years, if not for their practice. They were given small chambers, asked polite questions, presented as curiosities to foreign guests. Here is our ancient way, the Khan might say. He speaks to the wind, and the wind would not reply, because it was no longer being asked. Younger shamans left for the mountains. They took their drums, their feathers, their stones. They walked into forests that did not have roads, found valleys no map had recorded. There, they worked in silence, not because they were hiding, but because no one listened anymore. And in that silence, they heard things again. Sometimes a rider would come from the city, desperate, exhausted, carrying a child who would not wake. The shaman would not ask for coin. They would not even speak at first. They would drum. They would burn. They would cast. And when the child opened their eyes, the rider would weep. But they would not return. They would go back to the place where spirits had no space, where stories had become schedules. The drum, once the sound that opened empires, was now heard only in forests, in dreams, in places the court no longer walked. The court no longer hears the drum. The emperor's yurt is long gone. The names of those who once whispered in council have been carved into books and left to gather dust. But the wind remembers. It moves across the steppe as it always has. Low and slow, threading through tall grass, shaking the roots of old trees, carrying ash from long cold fires. It passes by broken stone where a palace once stood. It flows through doorways that lead nowhere. And sometimes it stops, just for a moment, as if listening, as if waiting to be asked. There are still stories told near the hearth, in quiet homes, far from cities. Children are told of a time when even the great Khan waited for the smoke to rise, when a man in furs could speak with the wind and be heard. They do not always understand, but they listen, and that is enough. Some say the shamans never left, that their bones lie beneath the roots of old juniper trees, that their drums are buried in caves with no names, that when lightning strikes just once, it is not anger but recognition. You may never meet one, not truly, but you might hear a rhythm while falling asleep, a sound that doesn't belong to the house, or the wind, or the heart. You might feel the hairs on your neck rise when you pass a certain tree. You might dream of a man with no face, tying red threads to the branches of a tree you've never seen. But no, that is what remains. Not the empire, not the gold, not the throne, just the space between breath and question, just the rhythm beneath the silence, just the wind, and somewhere in it, a voice, waiting to be heard again. Not all shamans were men. In fact, some of the most revered, the most feared, the most remembered, were women. They did not shout. They did not sit on councils. They did not lead armies. But when their drum began to speak, even the Khan's fiercest generals would bow their heads. In the camps of the elite, female shamans, known as Udgan, were often kept close to the royal court, not for decoration, not for lineage, but because of what they could do. They were dreamers, midwives of vision, spirit talkers who could walk into a child's fever and come out with a name. They did not speak often, but when they did, the room fell still. Their rituals were slower, more personal. They worked with cloth, with water, with soft breath. They tied knots that held memory. They traced lines on skin with fingers stained by herbs. They listened to mothers, to widows, to those whose grief was not loud, only long. They made no demands, and yet no one dared interrupt them during their work. Not because they were violent, but because they might see you in a way you didn't ask to be seen. One such woman served 5 queens. She outlived 3 of them. She never left the court, but no one remembered her entering it. When she died, the wind at Karakoram changed for a week. Birds did not fly over the central valley. The dogs refused to bark at night, and someone, no one knows who, hung a single red ribbon from the palace gate. It fluttered there until winter. The Udgan did not seek power, but they shaped it, quietly, with the way they sat, with the things they chose not to say. And sometimes, that silence was the most dangerous magic of all. There are rituals you've never heard of, not because they were banned, not because they were erased, but because they were never written. They lived in gestures, in pauses, in the way water was poured before a journey, in the way a bowl was turned 3 times before eating, in the way a child was held facing the wind on their first birthday. These were not ceremonies. They were threads, and they ran through the court like veins. Even after the drums were silenced, even after the priests built temples from stone, even after the scholars filled the air with names and laws, the gestures remained. A queen still touched her brow before stepping outside. A general still burned a scrap of cloth before battle. A cook still left 3 grains of rice near the door, in case someone unseen is hungry. These were not accidents. These were not folklore. They were memory, in motion, and they passed on, from hand to hand, from grandmother to daughter, from soldier to stable boy, not through command, but through habit, through instinct, through something older than obedience. You may think the old ways have vanished, but they haven't. They've only changed their clothing. They no longer wear robes of felt and bone. They wear silence. They wear routine. They wear the shape of things that don't ask to be noticed. Only done. And when you do them, you are remembering something. You were never taught. So the shaman's legacy remains, not in statues, not in scrolls, but in the way the wind bends a blade of grass, in the way smoke curls when no one's watching, in the way you hesitate, right before you speak a name that hasn't been spoken in a very long time. You've heard many names tonight, names of shamans, of khans, of tools that do not speak, but still remember, of places that no longer appear on maps, but still whisper when the wind is right. And yet, none of them ask to be remembered. Not loudly, not with monuments or medals, just quietly, in breath, in sleep, in the way you now see silence. A little differently. The Mongol Empire was not just horses and arrows, not just conquests and cities lost to fire. It was also a world of small fires in the dark, of feathers tied with care, of eyes closed not in death, but in trance. A world where the most powerful man on earth still waited for the smoke to rise, before choosing which way to ride. And the shamans, the spirit walkers, the dreamers, the bone readers, they are not gone, not truly. They have simply stepped one layer deeper into the quiet, into the places between stories, between footsteps, between sleep and waking, where they always lived. So now, as the night deepens around you, and the last of the fire fades to ash, close your eyes, let the stillness settle, let the stories dissolve, and if you listen closely, beneath your thoughts, beneath even the silence, you just might hear a drum, not loud, not urgent, just slow and steady, calling no one and everyone